Welcome to e-learning. All right, I'm just going to give you some quick notes on the methods of solutions. I know I passed this paper out on Friday. I just want to make sure that I go through some of these with you so that you remember what it is you need to do. So looking at this, we're going to choose the best method for solving quadratic equations. These are all the methods that we have learned so far. So for factoring, you want to check to see if it's easily factored. So remember, it's still in the form ax squared plus bx equals, or plus c equals 0. It has to be equal to 0 for it to factor. Look for the GCF first. If it has a greatest common factor, take that out. If it doesn't have a greatest common factor, look to see what the factors are. If you can easily see the factors, factor it into two factors, set it equal to 0, and solve for x. Okay, so that is factoring. Most of the easy ones, the ones that are in like x squared or have a GCF, a lot of those can be factored. So make sure that you check for those first because that's the easiest method to use. For graphing, we're not going to use graphing unless specified. The third one, taking square roots. If an equation is in the form ax squared plus c equals 0, that means it doesn't have a b term. The b term is missing. It only has x squared. You are going to solve like a regular equation. Okay, so this one you're going to solve like a regular equation. You want to get x squared by itself. So you want to isolate the x squared. I would subtract c from both sides, then I would subtract c, then I would divide by a. Get x squared by itself, take the square root of both sides, and solve. Don't forget to put plus and minus in your answer. Okay. The next one is completing the square. So you want to see, is the b term an even number? Now remember, we did solve these when b was not an even number, but you get all those crazy fractions. Do we really want to deal with the crazy fractions? Probably not. We can find a better method that we don't have to deal with those fractions. So we're going to look to see if b is even, then we can complete the square. Okay, so remember, to complete the square, we're going to divide b by 2. Whatever we get, we're going to square it, and we're going to do our plus blank, plus blank. So for these, we're going to have the plus blank and plus blank. Okay. And then the last one is the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula will work with any problem. Okay, so you can do every problem that is on this page using the quadratic formula. However, that is the longest formula, and it is not always convenient to use it for every problem, especially one that can easily be factored. Why would you want to try to use the quadratic formula and risk messing up some signs or something so simple when it can already be done? Okay, so this one can be used for any of the equations. So your assignment that you're going to be working on today is you're going to solve all of those problems using two different methods, which means the first method that you use needs to be the most appropriate. The other one, you're going to have to choose another method that works. So if I look at number 1, I'm going to look, can that easily be factored? Well, it looks to me that it can. Factors of 12 that add up to be 8. That's a simple factoring problem. So I can use factoring, and then I'm going to show how I factor. So whatever that factors into, and set it equal to 0, and then solve. Okay, so I'm not going to give you the answers for these, but I want you to work through them. Then you are going to, so factoring would have been the most appropriate because it's quick and easy. You can really factor that one and solve it a lot quicker than you can using the quadratic formula. Okay. The next one is we can look to see. Okay. Will taking square roots work? No, because we have a b term. It's not going to work when we have a b term, so we cannot take square roots with this. Will completing the square work? Well, b is even, so yes, completing the square will work. So we could also complete the square. Or you could use the quadratic formula. any of those will work for this problem, okay? I would probably complete the square before I would do the quadratic formula because it's a lot simpler. It's a shorter problem to do, and you don't have all of the numbers that you have to calculate in the quadratic formula. But it says 2 different methods. You can choose the second method that you want to use. So I don't care if you use completing the square or quadratic formula, just make sure that the first one is always the appropriate method. All right. Number 2, you could still use factoring possibly, but make sure you take out the greatest common factor. You can use completing the square if this b, the middle term, is even, but remember, a has to equal 1 to use completing the square. So if we go back up here to complete the square, a must equal 1. So you would have to take a greatest common factor out first before you can complete the square, if it's able to be taken out. So in this case, we could take it out to factor. We can take out the greatest common factor to use completing the square. But then when I take out a 2, this turns into a 7. So completing the square is not ideal because it's not an even number. So number 2 would not work well with completing the square. You can use the quadratic formula. You can try factoring. You cannot use square roots, and completing the square is not ideal because it's not even. It's just going to be a bigger mess. All right, so that is kind of how this is working. If you look down at number 3, we could use possibly factoring. We could use the square root method because it doesn't have a b. We could use the quadratic formula. The only one we cannot use on this one is completing the square because there's no b. We have to have an even number for b in order for that to work. So for the rest of your e-learning, you are going to work through the methods of solutions, and then you also will have a little Canvas quiz that you are going to complete. So that will be your e-learning assignment for today. Hope that helps. Have a great day, and I will see you next class.